What happens when a desperate alien civilization, facing extinction from an unstoppable enemy, attempts to call for help from the cosmos using ancient technology they barely understand? They expect maybe a single advanced ship, perhaps a small fleet if they're incredibly lucky. Instead, they accidentally tap into something far more dangerous than any weapon their enemies possess. They contact humanity during the middle of the largest military exercise in human history. The Zephyrians thought they were sending a simple distress beacon. They had no idea they were about to witness what happens when you interrupt 10,000 human warships in the middle of proving just how creative they can get with controlled destruction. Some species evolve for survival. Others for intelligence. Humans? They evolved for spite, stubbornness, and an unhealthy willingness to solve every problem with overwhelming firepower. The Zephyrians were about to learn why the rest of the galaxy had started using human solution as a synonym for beautiful overkill. This is the story of how a small plea for help accidentally became the most terrifying rescue mission the universe had ever witnessed, and why 3 words, "humans are coming," would soon become the most feared phrase in 12 star systems. The crystalline spires of Zephyr Prime pierced the violet sky like desperate fingers reaching for salvation that would never come. High Counselor Veltar pressed her 6-fingered hands against the observation deck's reinforced glass, watching as another transport filled with evacuees struggled to break through the planetary atmosphere. The ship's hull glowed cherry red from atmospheric friction and enemy fire alike. Below, the city that had stood for 3 millennia was dying. The harvester ships hung in the sky like metallic vultures, their biomechanical hulls pulsing with an obscene rhythm as they consumed everything in their path. Buildings that had housed millions were being broken down into their component atoms, fed into the insatiable hunger of the collective. "How many more transports?" Veltar asked without turning from the window. 14, replied Chief Technician Zarwith, his voice hollow. "Perhaps 15 if the orbital defense platforms can hold for another hour." Veltar's throat sacs deflated in despair. 14 ships to evacuate 2 million souls. The mathematics were simple and horrifying. Most of her people would die here, consumed by creatures that viewed entire civilizations as nothing more than raw materials for their endless expansion. The harvesters had appeared 6 months ago at the edge of Zephyrian space. No warning, no demands, no communication of any kind. They simply arrived and began consuming. 17 colonies had fallen in as many days. Now they had reached Zephyr Prime, the homeworld, and the end of everything Veltar's species had ever built. "The archive?" she asked. "Sealed and prepared for transmission," Zarwith confirmed. "If we cannot save our people, at least our knowledge will survive." The archive contained the sum total of Zephyrian civilization, their art, science, philosophy, and, most importantly, their warnings about the harvesters. Perhaps some other species would learn from their failures. Perhaps their deaths would mean something. "Counselor," called a voice from behind them. Veltar turned to see Sub-Technician Keelara approaching with what might have been excitement in her bioluminescent patches. "The deep archive scanners have found something." "Found what?" Zarwith demanded. "We've catalogued every piece of our technology a dozen times over." "Not our technology," Keelara replied, her patterns brightening. "Old tech. Really old. Pre-colonial era. It's buried 3 kilometers down, in the foundation layers of the first settlement." Veltar felt a flicker of something that might have been hope. The early colonists had been refugees from the homeworld's dying sun. They had brought with them artifacts from a dozen civilizations, including some whose purposes had been forgotten even then. "What kind of technology?" "Communications array. Quantum entangled, multidimensional. The power readings are unlike anything in our current systems. If we could activate it, we could send the archive farther than any conventional transmission," Zarwith finished, his own patterns beginning to pulse with possibility. "The quantum entanglement would carry it beyond the local galactic cluster." Veltar looked back out at the dying city. Another transport was climbing skyward, its escorts falling one by one to the harvester drones. Time was running out. How long to reach it? The excavation tunnels are still intact. 30 minutes to reach the chamber, assuming the power conduits haven't been damaged by the bombardment. And, to activate it? Keelara's patterns dimmed slightly. Unknown. The interface is unlike anything we've seen. But, Counselor, there's something else. The scanner readings suggest this isn't just a communications array. The power signature indicates it might be capable of She paused, her pattern shifting to colors that indicated both excitement and fear. Capable of what? Veltar pressed. Summoning, Keelara whispered. The ancient texts mentioned devices that could call for aid across the void. They were considered myths, but this device matches the descriptions exactly. The observation deck shook as another section of the city fell to the harvesters. Through the glass, Veltar could see the creatures themselves now, writhing masses of biomechanical horror that flowed through the streets like a living tide of consumption. Even if such a thing were possible, Zarwith said carefully, we have no way of knowing what might answer such a call. The galaxy is full of predators. More predatory than the harvesters? Veltar asked. Our people are dying, Zarwith. Our entire species faces extinction. If there is even the slightest chance that this device could bring help. She turned back to the window. Far above, she could see the bulk of a harvester mothership beginning its descent. When it reached the surface, there would be no escape for anyone. Keelara, take a team and reach that device. Do whatever you can to activate it. And, if it works? If something actually answers? Veltar's pattern shifted to the deep purple of desperate resolve. Then, we pray that whatever comes is more interested in stopping the harvesters than harvesting us. The journey through the city's lower levels was a nightmare of collapsed passages and emergency lighting. Keelara led her team of 3 technicians through maintenance tunnels that hadn't been used in decades, following scanner readings that grew stronger with each level they descended. The quantum signature is extraordinary, muttered Jenkar, the team's senior engineer, as he monitored his instruments. The entanglement pattern extends beyond our ability to measure. This device could theoretically reach anywhere in the universe. Or any universe, added NYL Tun, their quantum specialist. Some of these readings suggest extra-dimensional capabilities. The tunnel they were following opened into a vast chamber carved from the living rock. Ancient support pillars stretched upward into darkness, and the walls were covered in script from a dozen extinct civilizations. At the center of the chamber, raised on a dais of polished stone, stood the device. It was beautiful in its alien geometry. Crystalline structures intertwined with metallic components that seemed to flow like liquid mercury frozen in motion. Symbols of unknown origin pulsed along its surface with a faint, steady rhythm, as if the device were sleeping but ready to wake. Magnificent, breathed Jenkar. The engineering principles alone, this predates our civilization by millions of years. Keelara approached the dais carefully. Her scanner readings were off the charts now, indicating power levels that should have been impossible to contain in such a compact structure. As she drew closer, the symbols on the device began to pulse more rapidly. It's responding to proximity, she reported. The quantum field is strengthening. Above them, the chamber shook as something massive impacted the city. Dust rained down from the ceiling, and emergency alarms echoed through the tunnels. We're running out of time, Nyelton warned. The harvesters will reach this level eventually. Keelara reached out and touched the device's surface. The moment her fingers made contact, the chamber erupted in light. The symbols raced along the device's surface in complex patterns, and a low humming filled the air. She could feel the device probing her mind, reading her thoughts and intentions. Images flashed through her consciousness, the dying city above, the harvester ships, the evacuation transport struggling to escape. The device understood. It had been created for moments like this. Warning, the device spoke directly into her mind, its voice ancient and tired. Quantum summons protocol requires specific targeting parameters. Random activation may result in unintended respondents. We don't care who comes, Keelara projected back. We just need help. Caution advised. Previous activations have resulted in complications. Some who answer summons are not benevolent. Another impact shook the chamber, stronger this time. Chunks of ceiling began to fall. We're beyond caution, Keelara thought desperately. Our entire species is about to be extinct. The device paused, considering. Very well. Initiating broad-spectrum emergency beacon. May fortune favor your choice. The chamber filled with blinding light as the device activated fully. Quantum energies that had slumbered for eons suddenly blazed to life, reaching across dimensions and through spaces between spaces. The summons went out like a stone thrown into an infinite pond, ripples spreading in all directions. High above, in the dying city, Veltar felt a tremor that had nothing to do with the Harvester bombardment. For a moment, reality itself seemed to shiver. What was that? Zarwith asked, his instruments detecting energy readings unlike anything in their databases. Either our salvation, Veltar replied, or our doom. In the deep chamber, Keel-Era staggered back from the device as it completed its work. The ancient machine was dormant again, its purpose fulfilled. Whatever was going to happen would happen soon. Did it work? Jenkar asked. Something answered, Keel-Era said quietly. I could feel it on the other end of the connection. Multiple somethings. They're coming. How long? She checked her scanner. The quantum wake left by the device's activation was still dissipating, but she could detect something else now. Distant energy signatures, growing stronger. Minutes, she whispered. Maybe less. Above them, the Harvester mothership settled onto the city's remains like a feeding tick. Biomechanical tendrils began burrowing into the ground, seeking the last pockets of resistance. In the depths of the ship's consciousness, primitive thought stirred. Soon, this world would be empty of useful matter, and the collective could move on to the next target. The Harvesters had no concept of irony. They could not appreciate that in their hunger to consume everything on Zephyr Prime, they had failed to detect the ancient device awakening far below. They had no understanding that their victims had just done something unprecedented in galactic history. They had called for help. And, across the galaxy, 10,000 human warships received a distress signal right in the middle of proving who could create the most spectacular destruction during the largest military exercise in human history. The signal arrived just as Admiral Chen was explaining to Admiral Rodriguez why his new antimatter-enhanced stellar torpedoes were clearly superior to Rodriguez's gravity well generators. Both admirals paused their argument to listen to the translated message. The bridge of the fleet flagship went silent as they heard the desperate plea of a dying civilization. Well, Admiral Chen said finally, I suppose we'll have to finish our demonstration somewhere else. Agreed, Admiral Rodriguez replied. Besides, I've always wanted to see how gravity well generators work against biomechanical hostiles. Neither admiral mentioned the fact that interrupting a human military exercise was considered extremely poor form throughout the galaxy. Some breaches of etiquette required immediate and overwhelming correction. The Zephyrians had asked for help. They were about to receive the kind of help that would be discussed in horrified whispers for the next 1,000 years. The space around Zephyr Prime had been empty moments before. Now it erupted into chaos as reality tore open like fabric under stress. The first rift appeared 3 astronomical units out from the planet, a wound in spacetime that bled impossible colors. Then, another opened, and another, until the entire system was dotted with gashes in the universe itself. From each rift emerged something that made the Harvester ships look like children's toys. The lead vessel was a mountain of metal and fury that stretched for 20 kilometers from bow to stern. Its hull was scarred by 1,000 battles, painted in the deep blue and silver of the human Confederacy fleet. Weapon batteries lined every surface, and, at its prow, in letters that could be read from orbit, were painted the words Useus Indomitable and, below that, in smaller script, 5th Fleet Flagship, if you can read this, you're already dead. Admiral Sarachen stood on the ship's bridge, her weathered face illuminated by tactical displays showing the Harvester fleet positions. Around her, officers moved with the practiced efficiency of a crew that had spent years turning theoretical destruction into practical reality. Situation report, she ordered, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had commanded fleets through 3 galactic conflicts. Hostile fleet comprises approximately 200 biomechanical vessels, reported Commander Hayes from the tactical station. Unknown configuration, but power readings suggest they're designed for planetary consumption rather than fleet engagement. And the locals? 17 evacuation ships still attempting to break orbit. They're taking heavy casualties from the hostile screening forces. Chen nodded grimly. The distress signal had been clear enough, an entire civilization facing extinction from an unknown enemy. What the signal hadn't mentioned was that the enemy was actively consuming the planet while they watched. Signal the fleet. Battle Formation Omega-7. I want those evacuation ships protected, and I want a clear field of fire at the hostiles. Ma'am, interrupted Lieutenant Morrison from Communications, we're receiving transmissions from Admiral Rodriguez's task force. He's requesting permission to deploy gravity well generators. Denied, Chen replied immediately. We don't know how those things will interact with whatever technology the hostiles are using. Last thing we need is to accidentally create a black hole in system. Understood, ma'am. Admiral Rodriguez acknowledges and requests permission to proceed with Plan B. Chen paused. Rodriguez's Plan B was considerably more destructive than his gravity well generators. It also happened to be exactly the kind of overwhelming response that the situation seemed to call for. Granted. Tell Rodriguez he has carte blanche, but I want those evacuation ships clear before he starts his fireworks display. On the planet's surface, Veltar watched through the observation deck's cracked windows as the sky above exploded into light. The harvester ships that had been methodically dismantling her city suddenly found themselves engaged by weapons that defied every law of physics she knew. What are those? Zarwith gasped, his instruments failing to make sense of the energy readings. Our answer, Veltar whispered. The newcomer ships were like nothing in any database. They moved with a grace that seemed impossible for vessels of their size, and their weapons were beyond comprehension. Beams of coherent energy lanced between the fleets, each shot powerful enough to crack a moon. When they struck the harvester ships, the biomechanical vessels simply ceased to exist. The quantum signature matches the device activation, reported Keelara through the communications system. These are definitely what answered our call. Can we communicate with them? I'm trying, but their communication systems are incredibly advanced. They're using at least 7 different protocols simultaneously, and some of them appear to be operating on quantum frequencies we don't have equipment to decode. Above the planet, the UCS Indomitable's communication array finally isolated the local transmission frequencies. The translation matrix worked for several minutes to decode the alien language before producing a result. Local government is attempting to establish contact, reported Lieutenant Morrison. Their language is actually quite elegant once you get past the tonal components. Put them through, Chen ordered. The main screen flickered and resolved into the image of a tall, graceful being with 6-fingered hands and bioluminescent patches that pulsed in complex patterns. Despite the obvious stress and exhaustion on her features, she carried herself with unmistakable authority. I am High Counselor Veltar of the Zephyrian Republic, the alien said, her voice somehow conveying both desperation and dignity. Are you the ones who answered our call for aid? Admiral Sarah Chen, Human Confederacy 5th Fleet, Chen replied. We received your distress signal. What's the situation down there? The harvesters arrived 6 months ago. They consume everything, our cities, our people, our entire civilization. We managed to evacuate some, but millions are still trapped on the surface. Chen's expression hardened. She had seen worlds consumed by various hostile forces during her career, but there was something particularly obscene about an enemy that treated entire civilizations as nothing more than raw materials. How many evacuation ships do you have operational? 14 still functional. Perhaps a few more if the orbital defenses hold. They won't need to hold, Chen said grimly. Commander Hayes, signal Admiral Rodriguez. Tell him the locals have 14 ships that need safe passage. Everything else in this system is a legitimate target. Understood, Admiral. On the screen, Veltar's bioluminescent patches shifted to patterns that the translation matrix identified as profound gratitude mixed with disbelief. You would do this for us? You don't even know us. Counselor, Chen replied, humanity has a very simple philosophy when it comes to bullies. We don't negotiate with them, we don't reason with them, and we don't let them keep their toys when we catch them playing with them inappropriately. The communication was interrupted by a massive explosion that lit up the space between the fleets. On the tactical display, Chen could see that Rodriguez had begun his demonstration of why interrupting human military exercises was considered poor form throughout the galaxy. The UCS Devastator had opened fire with its experimental stellar torpedoes. Each projectile contained enough antimatter to sterilize a continent, and Rodriguez had fired a full spread of 12. The Harvester mothership, which had been in the process of consuming the planet's capital city, suddenly found itself at the center of a series of explosions that briefly outshone the system's star. When the light faded, there was nothing left of the mothership except a rapidly expanding cloud of superheated plasma. Direct hit, reported Tactical. Hostile mothership destroyed. Enemy fleet is breaking formation. Chen nodded with satisfaction. The harvesters might be efficient at consuming defenseless planets, but they clearly had never encountered an opponent that considered excessive firepower to be barely adequate firepower. Signal all ships. Begin systematic elimination of hostile forces. I want this system cleared within the hour. What followed was not so much a battle as a demonstration. The human fleet moved through the harvester ships like a scythe through wheat. The biomechanical vessels tried to adapt their tactics, but they had been designed to fight primitives armed with chemical rockets and fusion weapons. They had no frame of reference for enemies who casually violated conservation of energy and treated the laws of physics as strongly worded suggestions. Commander Lisa Park, aboard the UCS Retribution, watched her forward batteries reduce a harvester cruiser to its component atoms with a single salvo. Target eliminated, she reported to Fleet Command. Moving to next objective. Acknowledged, Retribution. Be advised, Admiral Rodriguez is preparing to demonstrate his gravity well generators on the remaining hostile concentration. Park grinned. Rodriguez's gravity well generators were normally used for opening jump points, but the Admiral had discovered that with a few minor modifications, they could also be used to create localized gravitational anomalies. The effect on enemy ships was both immediate and educational. All ships, clear the target area, Rodriguez's voice came over the fleet channel. Commencing gravity well demonstration in 30 seconds. The space around the remaining harvester ships suddenly twisted. Reality bent inward on itself, creating a gravitational field strong enough to turn matter inside out. The biomechanical vessels, no matter how advanced their technology, could not escape the fundamental force that held the universe together. When the effect dissipated, the harvester ships were gone. In their place was a perfectly spherical region of empty space and a few drifting particles that had once been a fleet. Hostile forces eliminated, Rodriguez reported with evident satisfaction. Beginning search and rescue operations for any remaining evacuation ships. On Zephyr Prime, Veltar stared at the sky in stunned silence. The harvester fleet that had seemed so unstoppable, so terrifyingly inevitable, had been eliminated in less than an hour. The beings who had answered their call for aid had accomplished what her entire species' military couldn't manage in 6 months of desperate fighting. Counselor, Kilara's voice came through the communications system. We're receiving another transmission from the human fleet. Put it through. Admiral Chen's face appeared on the screen again, but now her expression was less grim and more businesslike. The immediate threat has been neutralized, she reported. We're beginning recovery operations for your evacuation ships. Our medical teams are standing by to assist with any casualties. You destroyed them all? Standard protocol when dealing with hostile forces that threaten civilian populations, Chen replied matter-of-factly. We're also deploying construction ships to begin emergency repairs to your planetary infrastructure. Should have your primary power grid back online within a few hours. Veltar felt her legs give out. She sat down heavily in her command chair, overwhelmed by the sudden shift from inevitable doom to unexpected salvation. I don't understand. Why would you do all this for strangers? Chen's expression softened slightly. Counselor, humanity learned a long time ago that the universe is a dangerous place. The only way civilizations survive is by helping each other when help is needed. Today, you needed help. Tomorrow, maybe we'll need yours. But, the cost, your ships, your resources. Ma'am, Chen interrupted gently, this was target practice for us. We were in the middle of a fleet exercise when your distress signal arrived. If anything, you did us a favor by giving us something more interesting to shoot at than holographic targets. On the tactical display, Veltar could see the human ships moving with purpose through the system. Some were shepherding the Zephyrian evacuation vessels to safety, others were beginning what appeared to be massive construction projects around the planet. What are they building? She asked. Defensive platforms, Chen explained. Automated systems that will provide early warning and basic protection against future threats. We'll also be leaving a monitoring station and a small fleet detachment, just in case any more of those harvester things show up. For how long? Chen shrugged. Permanently, if you'll have us. Like I said, civilizations survive by helping each other. Consider it the beginning of a beautiful friendship. As if to emphasize the point, one of the human construction ships finished assembling what appeared to be a space station directly above the planet's capital. The structure was massive, bristling with the same kind of weapons that had just eliminated the harvester fleet. The UCS Sanctuary, Chen explained, noting Veltar's expression. Fully automated defensive platform with enough firepower to handle anything short of a full-scale invasion. Consider it a housewarming gift. For the first time in 6 months, Veltar allowed herself to believe that her people might actually survive. More than that, they might thrive under the protection of allies whose idea of a routine military exercise involved weapons that could reshape star systems. Admiral Chen, she said formally, on behalf of the Zephyrian Republic, I accept your offer of friendship and alliance. Excellent, Chen replied with a genuine smile. And, just so you know, you picked a good time to call for help. We've got the entire Fifth Fleet here for exercises. Usually we're scattered across half the galaxy. How many ships is that? 10,000, give or take a few hundred. Veltar's bioluminescent patches went completely dark for a moment as her brain processed that information. 10,000? Well, it is our largest annual exercise. We like to make sure everyone remembers why starting fights with humanity is considered a bad idea. As if summoned by her words, the space around Zephyr Prime continued to fill with human warships emerging from quantum rifts. Each vessel was larger and more heavily armed than anything the Zephyrians had ever imagined, and they kept coming. Veltar began to understand why the harvesters had been eliminated so quickly. Her people hadn't just called for help, they had accidentally interrupted the galaxy's most dangerous military force in the middle of demonstrating exactly why they were the galaxy's most dangerous military force. The universe, she realized, was about to become a much more interesting place. 3 days after the destruction of the Harvester fleet, Zephyr Prime was beginning to look like something other than a dying world. Human construction ships worked around the clock, their automated systems rebuilding infrastructure with an efficiency that bordered on the magical. What had taken the Zephyrian centuries to build was being restored in a matter of days. Veltar stood in her newly reconstructed office, watching through reinforced windows as massive human engineering vehicles moved through the city. The buildings they erected were stronger than the originals, incorporating materials and construction techniques that wouldn't look out of place on a fortress world. The humans are thorough, observed Zarwith, his attention focused on a datapad displaying the reconstruction statistics. They're not just rebuilding our infrastructure, they're improving it. These new power conduits can handle 10 times the load of our original systems. They're also beautiful, added Kielara, who had spent the last 3 days working alongside human engineers to understand their technology. The way they integrate artistic elements into purely functional structures, it's like they can't help but make everything aesthetically pleasing. Veltar nodded absently. The human approach to engineering was indeed remarkable, but what impressed her most was their attitude. These beings had traveled across the galaxy to answer a distress call from complete strangers, eliminated a threat that had seemed unstoppable, and were now rebuilding an entire civilization without asking for anything in return. Have we learned anything more about them? She asked. More than we initially thought possible, Zarwith replied, his patterns brightening with enthusiasm. Their technology is at least 3,000 years ahead of ours, possibly more. But it's not just advanced, it's elegant. Every system serves multiple purposes, and they build redundancy into redundancy into redundancy. They're also incredibly diverse, Kielara added. The construction crews alone represent at least 30 different human subspecies, each adapted for specific environments. And their cultural integration is extraordinary, they've somehow maintained individual identity while creating a unified civilization. A soft chime indicated an incoming communication. The wall display activated to show Admiral Chen's face, though she appeared to be calling from a different location than before. Counselor Veltar, I hope the reconstruction efforts are meeting with your approval. Beyond our wildest expectations, Admiral. But, I have to ask, this level of assistance seems excessive for a first contact situation. Chen's expression became thoughtful. Counselor, may I ask you something? When your people developed faster than light travel, what was the first thing you did? We explored, Veltar replied without hesitation. We sent expeditions to nearby systems, established colonies, searched for other life. And, when you found other intelligent species? We established trade relationships, shared knowledge, formed the basis of what became the Galactic Commerce Federation. Exactly, Chen nodded. You reached out. You built connections. You created something larger than just your own species. She paused, and Veltar could see something that might have been sadness in her expression. Not every species makes that choice. Some turn inward. Some become predators. And some, like your harvesters, become something worse than predators, they become parasites that consume everything they touch. Is that why you responded so decisively? Chen's smile was grim. Counselor, humanity has encountered the harvesters before. Not these specific ships, but their kind. Biomechanical swarms that consume entire civilizations and leave nothing behind. We've been tracking their movements for the better part of 2 centuries. This was news that sent Veltar's bioluminescent patches into a rapid pattern of alarm and confusion. You fought them before? Fought them, studied them, eliminated them whenever we find them, Chen confirmed. The collective you encountered was actually a relatively small one. We've dealt with swarms 10 times that size. Then, why didn't you warn us? Why didn't you reach out to other species that might be threatened? Chen's expression became genuinely apologetic. Because we tried that once. We sent out warnings, offered protection, tried to form a defensive alliance. Do you know what happened? Veltar shook her head. Most species accused us of manufacturing the threat to justify human expansion. Others decided we were the real danger and formed alliances against us. A few tried to capture our ships to steal our technology. So we stopped warning people and started simply responding to distress calls. The implications of that statement were staggering. Humanity had apparently been fighting a secret war against cosmic horrors while the rest of the galaxy remained blissfully unaware. How many civilizations have you saved? In the last 50 years? About 300. Some were facing harvesters, others were dealing with different threats. Starkillers, reality viruses, temporal predators, the universe is full of things that want to destroy civilizations for various reasons. And, you fight all of them? Someone has to, Chen replied simply. The alternative is to let innocent people die. Before Veltar could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the city. The communication with Admiral Chen cut off, replaced by emergency broadcasts from the human fleet. All civilian populations take cover immediately, came a voice speaking accented but clear Zephyrian. Hostile contact detected at system edge. This is not a drill. Through her office windows, Veltar could see the human ships moving with sudden urgency. The massive construction vessels that had been rebuilding her city moments before were retracting their equipment and moving to defensive positions. Above the planet, the newly constructed defensive platforms powered up with an ominous hum. What's happening? She demanded, opening a channel to Fleet Command. Admiral Chen's face appeared on the screen again, but now she was clearly on a warship's bridge. Behind her, Veltar could see officers moving with the controlled urgency of a crew preparing for battle. Long-range sensors have detected incoming ships, Chen reported. Configuration matches harvester technology, but on a much larger scale. How much larger? Chen's expression was grim. The lead ship is approximately the size of your moon. We're detecting at least 50 support vessels, each one larger than the mothership we destroyed 3 days ago. Veltar felt her blood turn cold. If the previous harvester fleet had been unstoppable by Zephyrian standards, what they were facing now was beyond comprehension. Can your fleet handle something that large? That remains to be seen, Chen admitted. This is the largest harvester collective we've ever encountered. But, Counselor, I need you to understand something. If this goes badly, if our fleet is destroyed or forced to retreat, we prepared an evacuation plan for your entire population. Evacuation to where? Human space. We have 13 worlds that can support Zephyrian biology. Your entire species would be welcome there, with full citizenship and rights. The offer was staggering in its generosity, but Veltar barely heard it. She was staring at the tactical display that Chen had shared, watching as red icons representing the incoming harvester fleet grew larger and more distinct. Admiral, that fleet, it's not just coming to consume our world, is it? Chen shook her head. No. Based on their approach vector and formation, they're here for us. This is a retaliatory strike. Retaliatory? The harvesters aren't just mindless consumers, Counselor. They're intelligent, and they communicate across vast distances. When we destroyed their advance fleet, we sent a message that there was something in this system capable of fighting them. They've sent a fleet large enough to eliminate that threat. Veltar's pattern shifted to deep purple despair. They're here because we called for help. They're here because they're parasites who can't tolerate the existence of anything that might resist them, Chen corrected firmly. This would have happened eventually anyway. At least this way, we're here to meet them. On the tactical display, new icons began appearing as more human ships arrived through quantum rifts. But, even with reinforcements, they were outnumbered at least 5-1. Are we going to die? Veltar asked quietly. Chen's smile was fierce and confident. Counselor, you're about to see why humanity survived long enough to become a spacefaring civilization. We may be outnumbered, but we're not outgunned. And, more importantly, we're really angry about being interrupted during our fleet exercises. The lead harvester ship finally came into visual range, and Veltar gasped. It was indeed the size of a moon, a writhing mass of biomechanical horror that seemed to twist reality around itself. Smaller ships swarmed around it like parasites, each one easily capable of destroying a planet. Fleet status? Chen called out to her tactical officer. All ships ready for engagement. Admiral Rodriguez reports his experimental weapons are charged and ready. Admiral Park requests permission to test her new temporal displacement systems. Granted to both. Signal all ships, weapons free, target priority alpha. Let's show these things what happens when you crash a human party uninvited. The space around Zephyr Prime erupted into chaos as 10,000 human warships opened fire simultaneously. The display of firepower was beyond anything Veltar had imagined possible. Beams of energy that could cut through planets lanced across the void, while missiles that contained their own pocket universes streaked toward their targets. But, the Harvester fleet was ready for them. The massive mothership deployed energy shields that absorbed the human weapons fire, while its escort vessels began returning fire with weapons that seemed to bend space itself. Hull breaches on decks 7 through 12, reported Commander Hayes. Shields holding at 60%. Return fire, full spread, Chen ordered. Target their command ship directly. The UCS Indomitable's main batteries fired in unison, sending a stream of antimatter projectiles toward the Harvester mothership. The projectiles detonated against its shields in a series of explosions bright enough to be seen from the planet's surface. But, the shields held. Admiral, reported Lieutenant Morrison, were receiving a transmission from the hostile fleet. Put it through. The main screen filled with an image that made Veltar's bioluminescent patches go completely dark. The creature speaking was clearly Harvester in origin, but it had been modified beyond any natural evolution. Its biomechanical body was a fusion of organic tissue and advanced machinery, and its multiple eyes burned with malevolent intelligence. Humans, it spoke in a voice like grinding metal, you have interfered with our harvest for the last time. Your species will be consumed and processed. Your knowledge will be absorbed. Your defiance will end. Chen's response was immediate and profane. Unknown hostile, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Human Confederacy Fleet. You are hereby ordered to withdraw from this system immediately or face the consequences. The creature's response might have been laughter, if laughter could sound like the screams of dying worlds. We are the collective. We have consumed 1,000 civilizations. We have absorbed the knowledge of 1,000,000 species. What can one primitive race do against such power? Chen's smile was cold and sharp. Well, since you asked so nicely, let me show you. She turned to her tactical officer. Signal Admiral Rodriguez. Deploy the stellar torpedoes. Full spread, maximum yield. Ma'am, at those power levels. I know what I'm authorizing, Commander. Do it. Across the human fleet, weapons that had never been used in actual combat began charging to full power. The stellar torpedoes were humanity's most destructive weapon, projectiles that contained compressed stars and could crack the crust of a planet with a single hit. Admiral Rodriguez had modified his with antimatter enhancement systems. Stellar torpedoes away, reported tactical. Time to target, 30 seconds. On the display, Veltar watched 12 points of light streak across space toward the Harvester mothership. As they approached their target, the space around them began to distort from the massive gravitational fields contained within each projectile. The Harvester ship's shields flared as the torpedoes struck, but they had been designed to stop energy weapons, not weaponized stars. The first torpedo penetrated the shield and detonated against the ship's hull in a flash of light that temporarily blinded every sensor in the system. When vision cleared, the Harvester mothership was still there, but a significant portion of its mass had been vaporized. Biomechanical fluids leaked into space, and sections of the ship's hull were beginning to collapse. But it was still functional, and it was still fighting. Direct hit, reported tactical with evident satisfaction. Enemy mothership severely damaged but still combat capable. The wounded harvester ship responded by opening fire with everything it had. Energy beams capable of boiling oceans lanced toward the human fleet, while biomechanical missiles that moved like living creatures streaked through space. The human ships scattered, their superior maneuverability allowing them to avoid the worst of the incoming fire. But some shots found their targets. The UCS Retribution took a direct hit from a biobeam and simply ceased to exist, vaporized down to the last molecule. Retribution destroyed, reported Tactical with professional calm. All hands lost. Chen's expression hardened. The Retribution had been a good ship with a crew of 8,000. Their deaths would not be forgotten, and they would not go unavenged. All ships, pattern Delta 7. Focus fire on the mothership's wounded sections. Let's finish this thing. The human fleet reformed into a new attack pattern, concentrating their fire on the damaged areas of the harvester ship. But the smaller escort vessels were moving to intercept, their own weapons systems proving devastatingly effective against human shields. The battle raged on, neither side able to gain a decisive advantage. For every harvester ship the humans destroyed, they lost one of their own. The space around Zephyr Prime became a graveyard of twisted metal and biomechanical debris. And, in the midst of the chaos, something unprecedented happened. The ancient device in the deep chamber beneath Zephyr Prime activated again. Keelara felt the ancient device stirring beneath her feet as she crouched in the chamber 3 kilometers below the battle raging in space. The crystalline structures were pulsing again, but this time their rhythm was different, urgent, almost frantic. It's responding to the conflict above, she reported to her team, her scanner readings showing energy levels that dwarfed even the device's previous activation. The quantum field is strengthening exponentially. But we didn't activate it, protested Genkar. We haven't touched it since the first summoning. Nyelton looked up from his instruments, his patterns shifting to deep concern. The device isn't being manually activated. It's responding to something else. The quantum signature suggests it's detecting multiple threats. Above them, the chamber shook as something massive impacted the planet's surface. Emergency lights flickered, and dust cascaded from the ancient ceiling. The battle was getting closer. Multiple threats? Keelara asked, even as she approached the device again. The moment her hand touched its surface, images flooded her mind. The galaxy as seen from impossible distances. Star systems consumed by biomechanical swarms. Civilizations rising and falling like waves on a cosmic shore. And, threaded through it all, a network of ancient devices like this one, placed by beings whose names had been forgotten before her species had learned to make fire. Warning, the device spoke into her consciousness, its mental voice more urgent than before. Harvester Collective has grown beyond predicted parameters. Local defense insufficient. Initiating secondary protocols. What secondary protocols? Keelara projected back desperately. Emergency authorization. Maximum response threshold. Previous summoning parameters insufficient for current threat level. The device paused, and Keelara could feel it reaching out across dimensions, touching the same network that had brought the human fleet but extending far beyond it. Initiating Omega-level distress beacon. Warning, responses to Omega-level signals may include entities not bound by conventional galactic law. Before Keelara could ask what that meant, the chamber erupted in light that made the device's first activation look like a candle flame. Energy coursed through the ancient crystalline structures as quantum signals went out to corners of the universe that most civilizations didn't even know existed. On the surface, Veltar watched through her reinforced windows as the battle in space reached a new level of intensity. The human fleet was holding its own, but barely. For every harvester ship destroyed, more seemed to emerge from the massive mothership's internal manufacturing bays. Admiral Chen, she called over the communication system, our deep scanners are detecting massive energy buildups beneath the surface. The ancient device is activating again. Chen's reply came between explosions as the UCS Indomitable took another hit from harvester biobeams. Any idea what it's doing this time? Unknown, but the energy levels are 10 times what they were before. Well, it can't make things worse, Chen muttered, then raised her voice to address her tactical officer. Status report. Fleet strength down to 7,000 functional vessels, came the reply. Enemy fleet reduced to approximately 30 ships plus the mothership, but they're regenerating faster than we can destroy them. Chen nodded grimly. The harvester's biomechanical technology was proving more adaptive than previous encounters had suggested. Every weapon the humans used, the enemy learned to counter. Every tactic they employed, the harvesters found a way to neutralize. It was, she had to admit, an impressive display of evolutionary adaptation. It was also going to get them all killed if something didn't change soon. "Ma'am," Lieutenant Morrison called from communications, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Confederacy High Command." "Put it through." The main screen shifted to show Fleet Admiral Marcus Stone, the highest-ranking military officer in human space. His usually calm demeanor was nowhere to be seen. "Sarah, we're tracking your engagement through the quantum beacons. What's your status?" "Holding our own, but barely," Chen replied honestly. "This harvester collective is unlike anything we've encountered. They're adapting to our weapons faster than we can deploy new ones. Can you withdraw?" Chen glanced at the tactical display showing Zephyr Prime. The planet's surface was still covered with Zephyrian cities, millions of people who had trusted humanity to protect them. "Negative, sir. We have civilians to protect." Stone's expression softened slightly. "I understand, Admiral. But I want you to know that help is coming. We've dispatched the First Fleet from Sol, the Third Fleet from Centauri, and emergency reinforcements from every available system." "How long until arrival?" 6 hours, minimum. Can you hold that long?" Chen looked at her tactical display again. "At their current rate of attrition, the fleet would be reduced to scrap metal in 3 hours. We'll find a way, sir." As the communication ended, the space around Zephyr Prime suddenly began to distort in ways that had nothing to do with conventional physics. Reality twisted, folded, and tore as new rifts opened throughout the system. But these weren't the clean, controlled dimensional openings that human ships used. These were ragged wounds in spacetime itself, bleeding energies that made every sensor on every ship simultaneously overload and shut down. "What the hell is that?" Chen demanded, staring at her blank displays. "Unknown, Admiral," replied Commander Hayes, frantically working to restore his instruments. "Whatever it is, it's jamming our sensors across the entire electromagnetic spectrum." Through the viewports, they could see something emerging from the largest rift. It was difficult to make out details through the spatial distortions, but it appeared to be a ship of some kind. A very, very large ship. As the distortions cleared, the true scale became apparent. The vessel that had emerged from the rift was roughly the size of Earth's moon, but, unlike the biomechanical horror of the Harvester mothership, this was clearly artificial. Its hull was a perfect sphere of what appeared to be crystalline metal, inscribed with geometric patterns that seemed to shift and flow when observed directly. "My God," whispered Commander Hayes as his sensors finally came back online. "The energy readings from that thing, it's generating more power than our entire fleet combined." More rifts opened, disgorging ships that defied every law of engineering that human science recognized. Some were geometric impossibilities, shapes that seemed to exist in more dimensions than spacetime could accommodate. Others appeared to be made of pure energy held together by forces unknown to physics. And, from the smallest rift of all emerged something that looked almost mundane by comparison, a sleek vessel perhaps a kilometer in length, its hull painted in colors that seemed to absorb light itself. "Admiral," Morrison called out, his voice tight with controlled panic, "we're receiving communication requests from the new arrivals." "All of them? How many ships are we talking about?" "Approximately 50,000, ma'am." Chen blinked. 50,000? "That's just the ones we can detect, ma'am. Our sensors are suggesting there may be more ships present that exist partially outside normal spacetime." Before Chen could process that information fully, the communications system activated without input from the crew. The main screen split into multiple windows, each showing a different alien face. The first speaker was clearly artificial, a geometric pattern of light that pulsed in complex rhythms as it spoke. "Harvester Collective detected. Quantum Guardians responding to Omega-level threat." The second was a being that seemed to be made of living starlight, its form constantly shifting between states of matter. "Stellar Wanderers acknowledge distress beacon. Preparing purification protocols." The third was something that looked vaguely reptilian, but with far too many dimensions to its form. "Empire of Eternal Night responds to summons. Target designation, cosmic parasites. Authorization level, extinction." More voices joined in, each more alien than the last, until the communication system was overwhelmed by the sheer volume of responses. Through it all, one message came through clearly: the Omega-level beacon had summoned every major military force in the known galaxy, and several from galaxies that weren't supposed to be reachable. Admiral Chen, came a new voice, this one speaking perfect, unaccented English. The screen cleared to show a humanoid figure whose features seemed oddly familiar despite being clearly alien. I am Commander Vexhai of the Terran Descendant Fleet. We received your distress call and came as quickly as possible. Terran Descendant? Chen asked, confused. Are you human? The being's smile was sad and knowing. We were, once. About 50,000 years ago. We've been exploring the spaces between galaxies since then, but we still consider ourselves human enough to answer when our ancestors call for help. Before Chen could ask any of the 1,000 questions that statement raised, the Harvester mothership chose that moment to demonstrate that it was still a threat. Biomechanical weapons erupted from its hull, targeting not just the human fleet but the new arrivals as well. The response was immediate and devastating. The crystalline sphere that had emerged first simply rotated slightly on its axis. The geometric patterns on its hull flared with impossible light, and the space around the Harvester mothership ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not vaporized, it simply stopped being, replaced by empty void. Quantum cascade elimination complete, reported the artificial being. Harvester mothership removed from local reality. But the smaller Harvester ships were still functional, and they adapted instantly to the new threat. Their biomechanical hulls began reconfiguring, absorbing energy from the alien weapons and growing stronger. Adaptive enemy confirmed, announced the Starlight being. Initiating stellar purification sequence. What followed was less a battle than a physics demonstration. The assembled fleet represented technologies spanning millions of years of development across dozens of galaxies. When they opened fire simultaneously, the laws of physics in the Zephyr system temporarily ceased to apply. The Harvester ships tried to adapt, but there were limits to even biomechanical evolution. It was one thing to counter energy weapons or kinetic projectiles. It was quite another to defend against attacks that rewrote the fundamental constants of reality or weapons that fired concentrated concepts rather than matter. Within minutes, the Harvester fleet had been reduced to constituent atoms, which were then reduced to constituent quarks, which were then politely asked to exist somewhere else entirely. Threat neutralized, reported Commander Vexhai. Beginning cleanup operations. The aftermath was surreal. Ships from across the galaxy worked together to repair the damage done to local spacetime by the battle, while others began scanning for additional Harvester presences in nearby systems. On Zephyr Prime, Veltar sat in her rebuilt office, staring at displays showing fleet compositions that read like a catalogue of galactic mythology. The Quantum Guardians, who existed partially outside normal reality. The Stellar Wanderers, who had learned to harness the power of entire star systems. The Empire of Eternal Night, whose technology was so advanced it seemed like magic. And, at the center of it all, humanity, the species that had somehow earned the respect and friendship of beings that could reshape reality with a thought. Counselor, Kilara's voice came through the communication system. The ancient device is powering down. It's transmitting a final message. What does it say? Task complete. Network status, stable. Recommendation, maintain alliance with human entities. They are amusing. Veltar's bioluminescent patches shifted to colors indicating profound confusion. Amusing? That's what it says. Also, there's a postscript. Warning, Omega-level beacon should only be activated in cases of galactic extinction events. Today was acceptable. Next time, try asking nicely first. Through her windows, Veltar could see the assembled fleets beginning to disperse. Some vanished through dimensional rifts, others simply faded from existence, and a few began the long journey back to their home galaxies through conventional faster-than-light travel. But not all of them left. Several dozen ships from various fleets remained in orbit, and Admiral Chen was requesting another communication. Counselor, Chen said when the channel opened, I wanted to let you know that you've attracted some very interesting attention today. Several of the responding fleets have offered to establish permanent diplomatic relations with your republic. What does that mean? It means, Chen replied with a smile, that the Zephyrian Republic has just become one of the most well-connected civilizations in the galaxy. You've got friends now who span dimensions and realities. Your people are going to be very safe. Veltar considered this. 3 days ago, her species had been facing extinction. Now they apparently had allies who could rewrite physics on demand. Admiral, I have to ask, does this kind of thing happen to you often? Chen's laugh was genuine and warm. Counselor, in my 30 years of service, I have never seen anything quite like this. Your people have a gift for making friends in very high places. As if to emphasize the point, a new communication request came through. This one was from the crystalline sphere ship, which had apparently decided to remain in the system as well. Zephyrian entities, it said in a voice like singing mathematics, the Quantum Guardians extend an offer of technological exchange and mutual defense pact. Your courage in facing extinction to save others is noted with approval. More offers followed. The Stellar Wanderers wanted to share their knowledge of stellar engineering. The Empire of Eternal Night offered protection from threats that existed in the spaces between realities. Even the Terran descendants wanted to establish cultural exchanges. By the end of the day, the Zephyrian Republic had gone from a single-world civilization facing extinction to the center of a galactic alliance that included some of the most powerful entities in existence. Counselor, Zarwith said quietly, I think we may have accidentally become the most important planet in the galaxy. Veltar nodded, still trying to process everything that had happened. And it all started because we asked for help. We asked for help, Keelara corrected from the deep chamber, and the universe answered. 1 year later, Zephyr Prime had become something unprecedented in galactic history, the first truly multi-dimensional diplomatic center. The planet's surface now hosted embassies from civilizations that existed in parallel realities, trait centers for species that communicated through quantum entanglement, and research facilities where beings from across the universe worked together on projects that would have been impossible for any single civilization to attempt. Veltar walked through the central plaza, marveling at how much had changed. Where once there had been a simple Zephyrian city, now there was a cosmopolitan hub where humans chatted with living energy patterns, where quantum guardians phased through solid matter to attend meetings with temporal researchers, and where the everyday business of galactic civilization proceeded with surprising normalcy. At the center of the plaza stood a monument to the events that had started it all, a replica of the ancient summoning device, inscribed with thanks in over 300 languages, including several that existed purely as mathematical equations. Counselor Veltar called a familiar voice. She turned to see Admiral Chen approaching, though the human was no longer in military uniform. Instead, she wore the insignia of the newly formed Galactic Coordination Council. Admiral, or should I say, Director Chen. Chen smiled. Admiral is fine. Old habits and all that. How are you adapting to your new role? Veltar's pattern shifted to something between pride and overwhelming confusion. Her official title was now Speaker for Emergent Civilizations, a position that had been created specifically for her after it became apparent that her people had an unusual talent for facilitating communication between wildly different species. It's interesting, she replied diplomatically. Yesterday I mediated a dispute between the Stellar Wanderers and a group of artificial intelligences who exist as pure information. The day before, I helped negotiate a trade agreement between humanity and beings from a dimension where time flows backwards. And today? Today I'm supposed to attend the grand opening of the new Temporal Research Institute, followed by a diplomatic dinner with representatives from 12 different galaxies, and then, I need to review proposals for the Deep Space Early Warning Network. Chen nodded sympathetically. The price of becoming the center of galactic civilization. How are your people handling it? Better than I expected, honestly. It turns out that Zephyrians have a natural aptitude for diplomacy and cultural integration. Half our population is now involved in some form of interspecies cooperation. It was true. The Zephyrian talent for pattern recognition and their naturally empathetic nature made them excellent at finding common ground between species that had seemed completely incompatible. Their bioluminescent communication system had even been adopted as a universal visual language for situations where traditional translation systems failed. And, Keelara? Veltar's patterns brightened considerably. She's become something of a legend. The Quantum Guardians have made her an honorary member of their collective consciousness. She spends half her time exploring pocket dimensions and the other half teaching other species how to use ancient technology safely. As if summoned by the mention of her name, Keelara materialized next to them, literally materialized, using a personal teleportation device that the Quantum Guardians had given her as a diplomatic gift. Counselor, Admiral, she said cheerfully, her pattern showing excitement mixed with slight disorientation. Sorry I'm late. I was just attending a meeting in a universe where mathematics is considered a form of poetry. How did that go? Chen asked with obvious amusement. Very well, once I figured out how to express our temporal research proposals as sonnets. The beings there have agreed to share their reality stabilization techniques in exchange for helping them understand human military tactics. They want to study our military tactics? Chen asked, surprised. Oh, not to use them, Kilara clarified. They find the concept of controlled overkill to be the most beautiful form of artistic expression they've ever encountered. They want to compose epic poems about the Battle of Zephyr Prime. Veltar shook her head in wonder. Even after a year, she was still discovering new ways that humanity had impressed the galactic community. The human approach to warfare, characterized by creative thinking, technological innovation, and overwhelming response to threats, had become a subject of study throughout the galaxy. Speaking of the battle, Chen said, I have some news that might interest you. Fleet intelligence has been tracking harvester movements throughout this galactic cluster. More of them? Veltar asked, her patterns shifting to concern. Fewer of them, Chen corrected with satisfaction. It turns out that our little demonstration here had some unexpected consequences. Word has spread throughout the Harvester Collective about what happens when they encounter determined resistance. Several swarms have actually changed course to avoid systems with known defensive capabilities. They're learning to fear us? They're learning that consumption isn't always cost-effective, Chen replied. The collective that attacked Zephyr Prime was completely destroyed, along with all its accumulated knowledge and resources. From the harvester perspective, that's like a corporation losing its entire inventory and research department in a single day. Kilara's patterns shifted to thoughtful consideration. The ancient device network has been monitoring harvester movements as well. According to the data, several collectives have begun avoiding this entire galactic region. The Omega-level response seems to have created a buffer zone about 50 light-years in radius. A buffer zone of peace, enforced by the memory of overwhelming force, Veltar mused. There's something poetically appropriate about that. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a messenger, a small, floating sphere of crystalline material that projected a holographic message. Speaker Veltar, your presence is requested at Emergency Coordination Center 7, the message announced in a voice like chiming bells. Priority level, moderate. Situation, first contact scenario requiring diplomatic intervention. Veltar sighed, her patterns shifting to resigned duty. Another new species? Apparently. Would you like us to come with you? Chen asked. Please. I have a feeling I'm going to need all the help I can get. Emergency Coordination Center 7 was located in what had once been a shopping district. Now it housed the rapid response teams that dealt with the constant stream of new civilizations, dimensional visitors, and temporal refugees that seemed drawn to Zephyr Prime like moths to a flame. Inside, they found a scene of controlled chaos. Technicians were working frantically to establish communication with something, while diplomatic staff prepared briefing materials for what appeared to be a very unusual first contact situation. What's the situation? Veltar asked the center's director, a human named Dr. Sarah Martinez who had become an expert at handling impossible scenarios. We've got a ship that appeared in system about an hour ago, Martinez replied, consulting her datapad. It's definitely artificial, approximately 3 kilometers in length, and it appears to be a generational ship that's been traveling for about 10,000 years. Refugees? That's the interesting part. They're not refugees, they're explorers. Their species launched this expedition specifically to find other intelligent life, and they've been searching for millennia without success. Veltar's pattern shifted to sympathetic understanding. They've been alone all this time? Gets better, Martinez continued. When they detected the energy signatures from our various fleets and dimensional research, they assumed they'd finally found a single advanced civilization. They have no idea that this system currently hosts representatives from over 200 different species. Oh dear, Kilara murmured. Cultural shock doesn't begin to cover it. What's their tech level? Chen asked. Early faster-than-light capability, basic fusion power, no artificial intelligence beyond simple automation. From their perspective, they're making first contact with beings who can reshape reality. Through the center's main display, they could see the alien ship maintaining a careful distance from the planet. It was clearly artificial but had an organic quality to its design, as if it had been grown rather than built. Have they made any demands or requests? Veltar asked. Just one. They want to meet with a representative of what they're calling the civilization that can call upon the gods. Chen raised an eyebrow. The gods? Apparently, their sensors detected the Omega-level summoning event from several star systems away. From their perspective, we're the species that casually summons divine beings to fight our battles. Veltar considered this. The newcomers weren't wrong, exactly. From the perspective of a civilization that had been alone for 10,000 years, the response to the Harvester invasion probably had looked like divine intervention. Set up a meeting, she decided. Standard first contact protocols, but let's try to ease them into the reality of the galactic community gently. How gently? Martinez asked. Start with just humans and Zephyrians. Once they've adjusted to the idea of multiple intelligent species, we can introduce them to the concept of interdimensional allies. The first contact meeting was held aboard the UCS Indomitable, which had remained in orbit as part of the permanent defense fleet. Admiral Chen had insisted on hosting, pointing out that the ship's diplomatic facilities were specifically designed for situations where cultural misunderstandings could lead to interstellar incidents. The alien delegation arrived in a shuttle that was clearly built for long-term reliability rather than aesthetic appeal. When they disembarked, Veltar got her first look at the species that had spent 10 millennia searching for friends. They were remarkably humanoid, though taller and more graceful than most humans. Their skin had a subtle iridescent quality, and their eyes were large and expressive. Most notably, they moved with the careful grace of people who had lived their entire lives in artificial gravity. Their leader introduced herself as Navigator Primeshvara, and her first words were exactly what Veltar had expected. We greet the mighty civilization that commands the loyalty of gods. We come seeking wisdom, friendship, and guidance in the ways of the greater universe. Shen and Veltar exchanged glances. This was going to require some very delicate explanation. Navigator Prime, Veltar began carefully, we are honored by your arrival and welcome your friendship. However, I think there may be some misunderstanding about the nature of what you witnessed. Misunderstanding? Eshvara asked, her expression confused. Our sensors clearly detected massive energy emissions consistent with divine intervention. Beings of pure energy answered your call and reshaped reality itself to serve your needs. That's not entirely inaccurate, Chen admitted. But they weren't gods, exactly. They were other civilizations, like yours, that have developed advanced technology over millions of years of evolution. Other civilizations? Many other civilizations, Veltar confirmed gently. The galaxy is full of intelligent life, Navigator Prime. You're not alone, and you never have been. The reaction from the alien delegation was immediate and profound. Several of them began weeping tears of joy, Veltar realized, not sorrow. Their species had spent 10,000 years believing they might be the only intelligent life in the universe, and, suddenly, they were being told that the galaxy was teeming with civilizations. How many? Eshvara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. In this galaxy alone? Conservative estimates suggest at least 10 million spacefaring species, Chen replied. Many more if you count civilizations that have transcended physical existence or moved to other dimensions. And they're friendly? Most of them, Veltar assured her. The hostile ones tend to be dealt with rather quickly these days. Over the next several hours, they gradually introduced the newcomers to the reality of galactic civilization. They started with basic concepts, trade networks, defensive alliances, cultural exchange programs. Then, they moved on to more advanced topics like dimensional research, temporal mechanics, and the various forms of post-physical existence that some species had achieved. By the end of the briefing, Navigator Primeshvara looked like someone who had just learned that her house was actually the center of a vast, friendly neighborhood. So when our sensors detected divine intervention, she said slowly, what we were actually seeing was a perfectly normal galactic emergency response, Kielera finished cheerfully. Though I'll admit, it was a particularly spectacular one. And, your people, the Zephyrians, you're members of this galactic community? We're fairly new members ourselves, Veltar admitted. This time last year, we were facing extinction. Now we're somehow the diplomatic center of local galactic civilization. How? Chen's smile was warm and genuine. They asked for help when they needed it. Sometimes that's all it takes. Navigator Primeshvara was quiet for a long moment, processing everything she had learned. Finally, she looked up at Veltar with an expression of hope and determination. Speaker Veltar, on behalf of the Wanderer Fleet and the Calorian people, I formally request membership in this galactic community. We have knowledge to share, skills to offer, and 10,000 years of exploration data that might be useful to others. Request granted, Veltar replied immediately. Welcome to the neighborhood. 6 months later, Veltar stood once again in the central plaza of Zephyr Prime, watching as the latest addition to the planet's cosmopolitan population went about their daily business. The Calorians had adapted to galactic civilization with remarkable speed, their natural curiosity and diplomatic nature making them popular among the other species. Their generational ship now served as a mobile research station, crewed by volunteers from dozens of different civilizations who were studying long-term space travel and its effects on cultural development. Any regrets? Chen asked, joining Veltar at the monument to the ancient device. About what? About activating that old machine. Your people went from a single-world civilization to the center of galactic politics in less than 2 years. That's a lot of change. Veltar's patterns shifted through several complex combinations before settling on one that indicated deep satisfaction mixed with wonder. Admiral, a year and a half ago, my people were facing extinction. We were alone, afraid, and convinced that the universe was a cold, hostile place where the strong consumed the weak and nothing else mattered. She gestured to the plaza around them, where humans chatted with energy beings, where Calorian explorers shared stories with quantum guardians.